My name is Trevor Johnson, and today I'm going to be discussing with you three countries that I've done research over this semester, and I will be discussing their economic systems. This semester I've done research on the three following countries: Canada, Norway, and New Zealand, and today I'm going to talk to you about how these countries are very similar, but at the same time they have unique differences that separate their economic systems. First up is Canada. Canada is the border nation to the north of the United States and has one of the world's healthiest economies. Canada has a mixed market economy that follows closely to the Anglo-Saxon model. GDP of Canada is around $1.6 trillion, with GDP per capita being around $44,000. The population of Canada is 35 million and has the 10th largest economy in the world nominally. The economy of Canada is linked closely with that of the United States, probably considering the fact that they're each other's biggest trading partners. Canada is also a member of the Global 8. Considering the fact that Canada is the second largest country in the world, its local economies throughout the country vary greatly. The western half of the nation, which is far less populated than the eastern half, is dominated by natural resources and agriculture. Canada is the largest exporter of minerals in the world, the third largest exporter of natural gas, and has the second biggest oil reserves in the world. The eastern half of the country, on the other hand, which its two largest cities, Toronto and Montreal, which make up for over 50% of the nation's GDP, have massive service and manufacturing industries. The service industry makes up for 70% of Canada's GDP, followed closely by manufacturing at 28%. 70% of Canadian labor force works in the service sector and 13% works in the manufacturing fields. Next, I want to talk to you about the Canadian exports and the country's economic growth. The three largest exports of the country are oil and petroleum products, automobiles and their parts, and gold. In 2015, exports were valued at $593 billion. The U.S. receives the majority of these exports, with over 75% of exports going towards the U.S. This is followed by China, Japan, and Mexico. Some economists believe that the country is too dependent on its natural resources. Since the 2007 global crisis, Canada, along with the majority of the world, has experienced a slower growth rate and an increase in unemployment. Unemployment reached a high of 8.29% in 2008, which was up from 6% before the crisis. Since then, they have been able to get unemployment rate down to 6.6%, which is probably due to the slow but steady growth rate, which in 2016 was 2.5%. The inflation rate of the country is around 1.8%, which is pretty healthy for any economy in the world. This is most likely due to the fact that Canadians have done a very well job of bringing investors back to the country. In Canada, the welfare system is one of the biggest parts of the government. Socialist programs have been on the rise since World War II, and they have one of the best welfare systems in the world. The Canadian welfare system has a much bigger role in its economy compared to the United States and the traditional Anglo-Saxon model. The universal healthcare system in Canada is one of the best in the world, and it's also the largest in the world. It has been around since 1984. 86% of Canadians are happy to pay higher taxes for their healthcare. The healthcare program is funded through tax dollars, which has led to a higher life expectancy and a lower burden on taxpayers in the long run. Next, I would like to talk to you about the economy of Norway. Norway has consistently ranked among the happiest countries in the world, and in 2016 it ranked at number 1. Norway has a mixed market economy with a large private sector as well as a large state sector. The GDP per capita in Norway is $71,000, making it the third largest in the world, while the total GDP is $356 billion. The population of Norway is around 5.08 million, and it follows the typical European model, which places interest on stakeholders and not the shareholders. Norway is looked at those in the United States, typically on the left, as a good example as a model for social market economies. Norway is also not a member of the collapsing European Union. Since World War I, the economy of Norway has exploded due to its optimization of its natural resources. Natural resources play a huge part in the economy of Norway, with oil and gas accounting for 9% of jobs, 15% of total GDP, and 39% of all exports. Unlike Canada, the state controls the majority of natural resources in the country. The government saves revenue from the sales of these natural resources and has established the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund. The Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund is valued at around $800 billion and is used in times of crises when stimulating the economy is necessary. Some economists believe that Norway might need to become less dependent on oil and other natural resources in order to maintain the growth rate they are at. Next, I would like to talk to you about the growth rate and unemployment of Norway. Lower prices in 2015 drastically cut the growth rate of the economy and has led to global concern of the economic stability of Norway. The growth rate dropped from around 2.2% to a mere 0.08%. Lower growth rate suggests that the country might have to rethink how to grow the economy. Even with a drop in the growth rate, unemployment has remained relatively low in Norway, with it being at 4% in 2017. This is one of the best rates in all of Europe, and before the 2008 economic crisis, the rate was under 2%. This is probably because unemployment laws in the country make it hard for firms to fire employees. Unions and collective agreements are very common, as one would expect from a European model. Next, I want to talk to you about how Norway has a unique way to approaching the labor market. Norway has a unique model to their labor market that's called the flexicurity model. The flexicurity model combines high labor mobility or flexibility with high levels of government-provided social insurance and/or security. This has led to one of the highest labor mobilities in all of Europe, making it easy to enter and exit the labor force. The labor force of Norway is around 2.8 million people, with a staggering 80% working in the service industry. Just like most European models, there is a high incentive for early retirement. Norway has dealt with these issues by reforming and narrowing their pension programs and reforming their welfare system. Next, I'm going to discuss Norway's exports, trades, taxes, and the welfare system. The largest exports in Norway are petroleum and gas, machinery and equipment, and metals. These exports account for 40% of the nation's GDP. The total value for the exports in the nation were around $102 billion in 2015. Norway's biggest trading partners are the United Kingdom, Germany, and Netherlands, with the United Kingdom receiving the highest amount of exports at 22%. Norway has a healthy inflation rate around 2.2%. With Norway having one of the best welfare systems in the world, it is no surprise that it is one of the most heavily taxed nations. High taxes on income and consumption are usually progressive taxes, with the top bracket of income being at 48%. The welfare system in Norway is one of the best in the world, but its tax burden on the people is around 39.1% of domestic income. With all this, though, government spending still only accounts for 45% of total GDP, which is small in comparison to the United States, which is around 102%. But not least, I'm going to discuss the economy of New Zealand. New Zealand is the second largest economy in the continent of Oceania. Like the other two nations, it has a mixed market economy and believes firmly that the government intervention is only necessary in markets during drastic conditions. This follows the traditional Anglo-Saxon model, but unlike other Anglo-Saxon model nations, what's unique about New Zealand is that it takes a more European approach when it comes to its welfare systems. The GDP of the nation is around $173 billion with a GDP per capita of 37,000. New Zealand is one of the smallest countries in the world with a population of 4.5 million, and like Canada, is a part of OECD. Over the last 30 years, New Zealand has gone a huge transformation in how it involves its economic policy. It used to be one of the most regulated economies in the world, and now it is home to one of the most free market economies. From a small agricultural economy to one that has been one of the biggest booming globalized economies. This has led to New Zealand being the third best country to conduct business in, according to Forbes. New Zealand, just like Norway and Canada, is rich in natural resources, and they have utilized them to increase growth and GDP. They have some of the strictest environmental protection policies in the world, and they use market-based policies to help the environment and to expand growth. The first one is a logging policy. Logging is not allowed on indigenous forest, and instead they plant foreign trees and always replant. The state sector, unlike in Norway, is not the majority controller of natural resources. Fishing quotas is also another market-based policy that New Zealand uses to affect their GDP. The Exclusive Economic Zone, or the EEZ, is an area in the Pacific that covers 15 times the size of New Zealand. All resources are owned by the New Zealand government, and people must purchase quotas to fish and use those regions' natural resources. New Zealand is a firm believer that they must protect resources if they want their economy to continue to grow, considering the fact that the majority of their GDP is natural resources. Next, I'm going to discuss New Zealand's growth rate and its unemployment rates. Growth in New Zealand is far outpacing the other two countries I have talked about. It has one of the fastest growing developed economies in the world, with an average growth rate around 3.5%. Many think this is due to the decline in Australia's labor market recently, and skilled workers are staying within the country and contributing to the economy. Unemployment is around 5.5% and has steadily declined in the past couple years. Next, I'm going to talk about the labor markets and trade in the nation. The labor force of New Zealand is around 2.5 million people, with over 74% working in the service industry. Recently, there has been a huge increase in immigration that is said to be caused by a housing market boom in the nation, which has lowered housing costs greatly, and one of the lowest borrowing costs worldwide. New Zealand has one of the lowest inflation rates, with an inflation rate at 0.03%. Like Canada and Norway, exports account for a huge part of the country's GDP, around 30%. Exports in 2015 were valued around $32 billion, with the biggest exports being dairy, cattle, logs, and wood articles. The biggest trade partners in New Zealand are China, Australia, and the United States. New Zealand has one of the lowest government interventions in the markets of any developed country in the world. Some economists say this has led to the rapid growth of the country and has led to it being one of the best countries in the world for business. Taxes in New Zealand are relatively low, and it makes it relatively easy to start a business there. The highest income tax rate is at 33%, with the top corporate tax rate being at 28%. This is far lower than Canada or Norway. Small businesses enjoy many tax breaks that the other two countries do not receive. Public debt in New Zealand is equal to around 30% of GDP, which is also lower than the other two nations. The countries of Canada, Sweden, and New Zealand are countries that the world looks at in awe of its amazing economic growth and stability. However, these three countries are similar in many ways, but also they share many differences. They are all mixed market economies that are dependent on their natural resources. They have large welfare systems and all have globalized healthcare. They are dependent on global trade for GDP and exports. Some of the differences between the nations are New Zealand has less government intervention in the marketplace, while Norway has a better labor market that includes massive labor mobility. Canada and Norway have higher tax rates, which help increase the stability of their welfare system. But New Zealand seems to have a better approach to saving its natural resources, which over time, economists believe, will help with the continuous massive growth of their economy. Thank you for listening today.